So, good morning, or evening, or afternoon, everybody. As was mentioned, this is not the first time I'm presenting here, and it's always a pleasant experience here. As was said, if you have questions, I will be looking into the chat from time to time, and you can ask the questions during and also at the end of this session. I will leave a little bit of time for questions as well. So if you have something that's bigger or it's not totally related to some feature that I'm explaining at the moment, you can leave it till the end. So as was mentioned, my name is Jiří Činčura. At the moment, I work as a senior software engineer in Microsoft, working on the .NET performance or in the .NET performance area. So all the different benchmarks and measurements and numbers that you see, especially if you saw the 5,000 pages long blog post that Stephen Tope is publishing every year, and it's getting longer and longer every year. So most of these numbers or most of these ideas that are coming for this blog post is from the measurements we are doing in our hardware lab. And then obviously Steve is showing you the examples of the code or exact measurements, because we are running these measurements every day, I would say every hour. That's not really true, but multiple times during the day, we are running those benchmarks and those different scenarios and collecting those numbers and producing dashboards and issues and whatnot. But today we will be talking about basically what's new in C#, and we decided to kind of start at the version 10 and go all the way to the latest version, which is version 12, which will be actually released tomorrow. So today we can still say that the latest version of the .NET is .NET 7, and tomorrow the .NET 8 will be released, and the latest version of the C# will be as well released. If you are eager to see what's new, check the keynote. Definitely tune in for the .NET Conf event that's starting tomorrow. I'm talking from the Europe-ish time zone, so tomorrow evening. But if you are in a different time zone, it might be morning, night, whatever. I'm pretty sure it will be recorded, so you can watch the recording as well. So let me start. As you can see here, I have a Visual Studio here running. It's the latest preview. I don't know whether it's really the latest preview, but it's the preview. And from time to time, I'm updating it. So hopefully it's not too far, but it will be absolutely okay for us to see what's happening in there. And let me start with something that was before C#10, and you are probably familiar with this one, and that's the records. So I can do record and let's say person, and it will be something like name and age, for example, or something like that. And this will give you kind of a shorthand representation of a class that has a bunch of extra functionality, including toString and equality and other stuff. But C#10 introduced a new feature that's actually using structures as the records. So if you know, or if you're using the structures and you know the difference between class and the structure, you can use the same functionality with the record as well. So let's say I want to replace this name with something a little bit better. So let's call it a name, or maybe full name, and it will be called name. And then I will create another record that I will call full name. It will be just the first name, as you can expect, and the last name. Thank you, IntelliSense, or Copilot, or whatever is the proper name that was just helping me write the code. So this would be the normal one before, but now I can put a struct modifier for my record, which for the full name kind of makes sense, or maybe for the age or whatnot, and it will be generated as a structure. I can now even explicitly say it's a class. If I want to be explicit, for example, I have a team that's using a lot of different environments, let's say, and you are programming in C# and Python and JavaScript and Perl and whatnot, you might say, hey, I would rather type a class, so whoever is reading the code understands that this is a class, or I can type a struct, so whoever is reading the code kind of understand that it's a structure as well. So that's probably the biggest feature in there. And as you probably, hopefully, not probably, but hopefully noticed, C# is released every year together with a new version of .NET. So the features we are getting are not these huge features we were used to with like C# 3 or 4 or something like that, because the time span is obviously a little bit shorter. Also, we cannot pretend that C# is not 20 years old. It's a language that has 2 decades of history. So creating a huge features is getting more and more difficult, because you need to think about backwards compatibility and a lot of code and so on and so on. So either you are going to create a huge breaking change, which means the new feature needs to be really, really good, or you need to think about stuff that basically is like compatible or creates as little friction as possible with the existing code. And I will touch that a little bit as well. So the next on the list that I want to talk about is a small feature, but makes absolute sense. Let me change a little bit my code in here. So I will remove this one. And now what I can do is put a using here, the normal stuff that you would be using. So for example, using system, and suddenly the console is actually working as it should. Especially if you are having a bigger project that's, let's say, properly layered, it happens that you have a lot of usings at the beginning of each and every file, because you have, I don't know, some business layer, some validation, database logic and whatnot, and you have maybe 2, 3, 4 namespaces that you are using all the time from all of these different layers. And especially if you are doing ASP.NET development, be it minimal APIs, MVC, Blazor, then you probably have a bunch of those Microsoft.ASP.NET Core something namespaces at the beginning of each file or each Razor file, and so on and so on. So what you can do now is something that's called global usings. So let me create a new file in here, and I will call it usings. For example, the name does not matter. Usually it's called usings, using, something like that. It's up to you. I will delete everything that's in here, and I will be using system. But if I do it this way, then it will be only for this file. But I can create a global, or put a global modifier in front of this one. And suddenly, if I go back, you can see that this system is kind of grayed out. That's the Visual Studio telling me, hey, this using is actually not needed. So I can remove it. I can shorten my code a little bit. I will shorten this one as well. And now still the console works. Let me do something else. I will do, for example, regular expressions and do, I don't know, like cache size or something. I don't care. Console write line, regex or regex, depending on what you want. Just some property, I don't care. And now I have this system text regular expressions on the top of the file. What I can do is remove this one and put it into my usings, and again, put a global in front of it. Now, there we go. Visual Studio took a second to realize that it's there, and now it's working. It's not with the red squiggly on the bottom. So again, if you have a lot of namespaces, or you have a like extensions method, or some like general logic or general helpers that you are using in each and every project, especially as the project grows, or it may be even a company-wide stuff, you can create this usings file and put it into your project, and it will be absolutely fine. What you can also do, and it's a little bit pushing this feature to the extra, is you can define these usings as part of your CS proj. So if I do item group, import group item group, if I do item group and I do using, I can define this one as part of my CS proj file. Well, not only in the CS proj file, I can define something as part of my, for example, properties file. So if you have like a props file somewhere, or even bringing NuGet packages or other references, you can have it as part of your project file. It does not have to be a C# file as well, which gives you a lot of flexibility, because now basically you have all the features that the MS build offers you, including conditions, including like overriding it on different levels, maybe even joining it from different folders, and so on and so on. This feature, this CS proj, or in general, like MS build properties, work pretty easy, because now if I open it in the file explorer and go into the OPG folder, here in the debug, I will see that it generated this global usings file. This is the old one that was generated by default for the ones that was there as I created the console app. But if I would put something here, something almost clicking all over the place, something in here, it would eventually ended up in this file as well. So you can see, hey, what is actually being generated or something like that. So let me close this one. Maybe I remove this one so it's not causing any trouble. I can uncomment maybe this one because it's the default anyway, which is a next feature. It's part of the SDK more than a language feature, but its implicit usings gives you all these 5 or 6 default usings that we were used to have at the beginning of each file, which is like the system text, and so on and so on. I don't remember, system IO or something like that. So that gives you this feature. So I have it obviously enabled. So that's the global usings. Let me go a little bit further, and you saw me do that before. Let me put it back. So the standard definition of a namespace is a namespace keyword, then the name, and then the opening and closing bracket, parentheses, whatever is the proper name. Let's call it a bracket. Or curly braces, I think it's really the correct name. Anyway, you get this corrected, that's fine. The problem with this one is that it gives you an extra kind of noise, and especially if you are doing like a normal C# type development stuff, which would be like most of the time, then you don't have multiple namespaces in your file. You can, but you probably won't. The C# language is fine with that, but we are kind of following like one namespace per file. It kind of even doesn't make much sense to mix it match. So what I can do is, instead of having namespace and opening and closing a block, I can have a semicolon at the end, and it basically defines something that's called file scoped namespace. So a namespace that have a scope across the full file. And this saves me a little bit of characters, a little bit of typing. And you might be wondering, well, this is nice, but it's kind of a syntactic sugar. And what is it actually solving? Like, I don't care about the opening and closing bracket on the namespace. I used it last 20 years, so I can probably use it for next 20 years. It gives me the ambiguity, like somebody will be using this short syntax, somebody will be using the long syntax. Are we going through all of our code bases and changing it into this like shorter one? Is it worth the effort? and so on and so on. So a lot of questions like what's the value? And when I first saw this feature, I was like, yep, exactly the same thoughts. I was like, is it really that important to have this as a feature? Like, okay, it could have been shorter initially, but it's not, and we will live with that. It's fine. It kind of makes sense. It's like, logically nesting inside, same with the class and method and whatnot. But then I found one feature, one application myself, and other one that a friend of mine actually told me, and I would like to share it with you. The first one is that oftentimes I am doing like pull request reviews or reading the code on my phone. I know probably the stupidest device to do like pull request review or reading the code as part of like learning how something is implementing and whatnot. But that's what I do because I have my phone all the time with me. So if I have a little bit of time, I can check something and see whether I need maybe a big screen, whether I need it more later that day or tomorrow or something like that. And using this namespace basically saves me a couple of extra characters on the left side. So on the phone, especially on the phone, that saves me a valuable real estate. I know it sounds stupid, but it's really helpful for me on the phone because it saves me these white spaces and I don't have that much like screen real estate on my phone. So I'm actually liking this one if the project that I'm reviewing or checking is actually using this one. And the other one is for let's say newcomers or beginners or people coming from different environments. That's the other usage. And a friend of mine is actually teaching a course in, I think it's elementary school or something like that, like 10, 12-year-old kids learning how to program. And he says, well, try to explain 10-year-old what is like a namespace, and similar with other features in the C# with like top level statements. We will get to that as well. Like what is a class and why do you need this bracket in here and so on and so on, because you can probably relate when you start programming like really the first time, it takes a lot of patience and effort to realize that the compiler needs it exactly. Like if I remove this semicolon, you and me, we know this is not going to work because the compiler is kind of strict and it says, no, I need a semicolon. Although in this case, it would be like, you could infer it because there is the closing bracket. So this should be probably the end of it and so on and so on. We can argue about it a lot more, but it's basically syntactically incorrect. And if you are teaching like 10-year-olds, they can easily delete some character by accident. Their brain, their eyes are not trained to see all these like small characters that you might be missing because you spent last, I don't know, 20 years programming in this language. So when he's teaching this course, or I don't know how to call it properly, like 10-year-olds, he says this is really helpful because we can remove all this boilerplate like brackets and indentation and spaces and whatnot, and they can focus on creating the code and making whatever they are making. So it is really, really helpful. Together with the top level namespaces, as I mentioned, you can also use something that's called top level statements. So basically this program and main, for most of the time, especially if you are creating like a small, I don't want to say microservices, but it's something like this, let's say small self-contained solutions, let's call it microservices, but it can be whatever else. This is just a noise as well. So now what you can do is just remove this one, right? And you can just put it in here. What is it complaining? Oh, I have this one in here. And the namespace. Oh, no, this is fine. That was the namespace. So now I don't have to declare the static class and static main and so on. I can just start typing the code. And you've probably seen this one, especially if you're using minimal APIs in the ASP.NET Core, because it removes this orchestration and allows you to write the code a little bit shorter, a little bit easier. So you can get up from the ground a little bit faster. I will put it back because I will need more of the structure, and you can use both. It's not like, hey, the new one is better or something like that, but it still makes a little bit of sense to have this nicely organized. By the way, I'm not going to cover all of the features of C# 10, 11, and 12. I'm kind of selecting the, I don't want to say most useful one, because all of the features are useful in some scenarios. I'm selecting some that are my favorite one, let's say, or at least that I find that have a broad application across the code bases. And it doesn't have to be, hey, you are writing high performance code, you are writing web applications, you are writing WinForms or something like that. It's like across the board. You can be writing libraries, you can be creating web applications, and you can use all of this. So another one, you probably know that we have a bunch of pattern matching stuff that we can use in the C#. So for example, the most commonly used ones would be like is null, for example, that we can use to check that something is null or whatnot. And the pattern matching is improving with each and every version of the C#. And we will see, as I will go through the versions, that there is a bunch of extra new features in each and every version. But one that I want to talk about is basically improved property patterns. So if I create a person, because I already have an object for it, and let's say the age will be 1, why not? Maybe the name should be first, and the name will be new full name, and let's say first name equals empty string, that's fine. Last name equals empty string, that's fine as well. Let's close this one, and that's it. By the way, this is a great example of exactly the same feature. I knew that I need to close the bracket. I knew that I need this one. But if you're starting in a programming, it takes you a couple of months, years, weeks, I don't know, to kind of realize, hey, I need to be really, really strict. Because although if I remove this one, you will be able to understand the code. Like if I will give you it on a paper, you will say, hey, I can understand the algorithm or whatnot, but the compiler will not. What is this one complaining about? Oh, I'm doing it the wrong way because obviously I'm stupid. It should be this way because I have the records there. So let me make it a little bit shorter. And this one, and the last name should be this one as well. So now what I can do is type like is person or whatever, it should be person. But what I can do is also do a pattern matching. So I can do name, and previously, in previous versions of C#, I had to do something like this. So first name, what is it complaining? Oh yeah, doesn't really matter, that's fine. I'm just working on the syntax. So I need to do name, then the colon, and then open the brackets again, which syntactically makes sense. I'm like nesting the pattern matching. But what I can do now is use what you would probably do in the first place. Just use dot and do something there. And let me close this one. And just use the dot first name. Sorry, I'm using, this one. That's why it's complaining. I finally saw it. But I'm talking about this dot, so I can like do the same stuff as with the nesting or whatever, the same way I'm used to in the C# code normally that I would do. So that's a small one. Let me do another one that I find valuable, not else. Let me define some functions. So for example, I take nothing inside, or let me take, I don't know, date time, dt, and if the dt is Monday, what is the day of week? It's not Sunday, but Monday, then I will return 1, otherwise I will return 0, for example. I know it's a stupid code, but it's fine. Now the compiler is telling me, hey, this delegate, this lambda, has no return type for me, because that's basically saying, hey, I'm returning either an integer or a string, so I don't know what you're actually returning. So what you can do now is define a return type for your lambda. So in my case, let's say it returns an object, and then an integer and string will be fine. So before the lambda, kind of like the function, but I'm missing the name of the function because this is an anonymous function, I can put a return type. Same is with the attributes. Now I can put attributes for lambdas, either for the input types, return types, or the lambda itself. So if you have some attribute that you need to apply on top of that, then you can do that as well. Another small feature is that you have a constant string, like a version, for example. Let me make it empty, and let me do 2 constant strings, which would be like application name, which will be test, for example, and then another one, which will be a version, for example. And you might be generating the file or something like that. So you have these constants, and you would like to have also like a title, for example. So before C#10, you would have to do something like appname plus space plus version, which kind of worked. It's okay, but it's old school. This code feels like C#1, let's say. It feels like it's year 2005 or something like that. So you cannot easily see what the resulting string will be. You are concatenating with these pluses, so it's not easily readable, and so on and so on. What you can do now is, as long as all the strings that you have are constants as well, you can use the string interpolation to put these strings together. So what I can do is do appname, space, and version. So now it's a little bit more readable. It matches that we are all using string interpolation everywhere, so we can use it for constants as well. The only limitation is that all the strings that you are putting into this one need to be constants as well, because it will be evaluated as part of the compilation. It's not going to be evaluated as part of the runtime, which is what normally happens when you have string interpolation as part of your normal runtime code. So the next one is a small piece of code that I will just copy paste in here, so it's a little bit easier. Well, I copy pasted it into wrong place, into this place, and it's this new expression called caller argument expression. And you probably know these caller attributes that we have: caller file path, line number, and member name. And what these allow you to do is put it on top of the code you have and have it as a label, and it basically tells you, hey, the compiler will fill whatever needs to be filled. So if it's a line number, it will put a line number there, and so on and so on. So the caller argument expression, what it's doing is it's basically putting there the expression that was created as part of this condition. So let me show you how it looks like. I will clean up the code, and let me do validate, and I will do false. This is the easiest way to look at it. If I run it, then we will see that it says argument failed validation. It says false inside, which kind of is nice. But what I can also do is, for example, have a different false condition. And now you might say, well, it's still going to say false because the bool is false. But no, because it's the expression, now it's going to give me the expression itself. And I can do a bunch of other stuff. So I can do like date time, UTC now, ticks equals 1, which again will be false. And if I run it, I will get again the full expression. So this is a really useful feature if you are creating some kind of testing or validation framework and you want to provide extra information like why the validation failed, or not why, probably don't know why it failed, but what part of the validation failed. Like, hey, this is the expression and it failed. So as you are reading it in the error log or something like that, you can actually see, oh, it's this part, I forget about something, I can fix it immediately, and you can see it from the error log itself. So that's this caller argument expression. So let's move a little bit forward, and another feature that I really like, and it's called raw string literals. So let me do some string, it's called s, and let's do like a multi-line string. So for example, I'm creating an email or template or even a simple log message. So it will be something almost. Something failed. Oh, come on, my hands are off the keyboard. And then I would like to have like A false and B true, whatever that means. And now if I'm in a Visual Studio, you can see that it's composing the string together for me. And then if I print it, we will see that it was kind of okay, but I would like to have it formatted. And we all know that I can use this verbatim string, whatever, something. So I can do this, this, and this. Now, if I run it, oh, it's indented because I indented it in here. So what I actually need to do is put it in here. And now the code is less nice, let's say. It's not super difficult, but it's less nice. But now the output is something that I would like to kind of have. And now if I want to have it a little bit indented, I can obviously indent it a little bit. But now it's difficult to kind of figure out what is the actual indentation like. Is it this part, or now it's a little bit difficult because you don't know how far from the left you are, especially if you are part of like this indentation inside the code. So what I'm heading at is this raw string literals. So now if you start your string with at least 3 double quotes, you can start more, and I will show you why would you like to do that. Then you have a so-called raw string literal, and let me put this way and this way. Yeah, and I need to do this. Now I have the string completely indented the way I want, including the new lines and so on and so on. And you can probably see that there is this gray vertical line as part of my code. And the vertical line is telling me where is actually the start of my string. So let me first print it, and it's still nicely indented. But now the string is also nicely indented as part of my code. It's not all the way to the left or a little bit from the left. So that's nicer. And how it works is that you have these 3 double quotes as the beginning and as the end. And the end, basically these white spaces, are saying whatever is on the left side of this one will be ignored. So this one says, hey, everything will be ignored, which means this will be ignored, this will be ignored, and also this will be ignored. And I can do the indentation any way I want. So if I'm not into this one, I can shift it a little bit in here and it's still fine. But if I do this, you will see that it's complaining because this one is basically before the string. But I can do it this way, for example, and now it tells me, hey, you have this white space in here. Maybe that's something you wanted. I don't know. But basically, this one tells me where it starts, where is the 0 position for the string. And the reason why it's these three double quotes in here is that I can actually put quotes or double quotes as part of my string. If I run it, you can see that it's still there. And as long as I'm using n-1 double quotes, then it's fine. If I would use 3, now it starts complaining. But what I can do is put 4 at the beginning. Well, let me fix this one and put 4 at the end. And suddenly these 3 are okay because I'm using n-1 inside my string. So if you are copy pasting like a JSON or something into your code and you are expecting double quotes inside, you can use 3 or more of these to make sure that these double quotes are not interfering with your string. So especially as part of like unit test or something, I'm quite often doing like, let's put 5 in there or 10, and then it's fine because I know there will be no collision, so something like that. The next step that you can do is put 2 or more $signs at the beginning. And if I put 2 in there, I can put 1 curly braces, 1 curly brace, and it's not opening the string interpolation because it's n-1 of this one. So if I run it, it still says date time now, not the value itself. But if I do 2 now, because I have 2 of these at the beginning, it's now a real string interpolation, and now it says the date time I'm expecting in there. And again, this allows me to, for example, copy paste a JSON into my code. So if I would do something like this, a simple JSON file or JSON literal, let's say, first name, whatever, when we are talking about this one, and the last name, when we have something like this, it allows me to easily copy paste a JSON into this one without interfering with the rest of the stuff. And if I do, for example, args.length, now it's fine. It's not interfering. I can do 2, and it works just fine. This one is a normal JSON. These 2 are opening the string interpolation, including these double quotes that are not interfering with my, in this case, 4 double quotes that I have at the beginning and at the end. So speaking of strings, there's another one that's related to the strings as well. So let me do another string, and let's call it a test, for example. And sometimes, especially if you are parsing or serializing stuff back and forth, you might be very likely working with the UTF-8. So there's a question, can I pass my value to message in caller argument expression? Yes, you can, but it will be overwritten by the compiler as it's putting it in there as the default value. So it's a normal value for the argument function, so you can put your value in there. The question is, why are you putting the caller argument expression in there? But yeah, you can, but if you need extra string or something, then you probably need to create an extra argument and leave this one intact. But if you want to like override it or something, you can. Another question. I was always wondering why raw raw string literals haven't been introduced earlier before C# 11. It's especially helpful when creating SQL queries. Well, I don't know. I'm not part of the C# language design team, language design meeting. But as with all the features, you need basically 2 things. You need a right time, and you need the time itself, because you need to implement it. And if you've ever followed a feature from proposal to implementation in the language, it's slightly more difficult than your normal, hey, let's create a new class or something like that, because the programming languages, especially like real world programming languages like a C# or Java or PHP, are difficult because you have all this backwards compatibility and overall resolution and whatnot. So I don't know, probably there was not enough time to implement it, and it was not a good time to implement it. Because if you have a new feature, something that you need to provide, especially if you are providing a proposal, which you can go to GitHub and provide it in there, is like a reason. And the reason needs to be strong enough to start with the implementation proposal and so on. So you need to have broad enough application so it's valuable. And if you go into the language design repo and you see all the proposals, you will see that there's a bunch of those. And to get across the implementation bar, it needs to be something really, really good. And something that's really valuable to, let's say, like 90% of C# developers. So probably that. Another question, do you use record type as an alternative of class model? As an example, DB table models and API models. Usually what I do is I use records when I need to have like a type that has a name that I can extend, but I don't want to spend all the time extending it. Like, obviously I can put extra methods and so on in there, but if it's like a really small self-contained type, almost like a tuple, then I'm using the records. The drawback or the something to remember about records is they have by default value equality. They don't have reference equality, even for classes. As long as I need one or the other, that might disqualify using pure class or pure record. But it's based on the feel. It's another feature like, when are you going to create an extra method? Well, I kind of get a feel for it. It's the same for the record. If I feel like, hey, a record is fine, I will create it. If I feel like probably class would be better, I create a class. I think that the analogy with like when you create a new method is exactly the same. When you feel like this one is better, it's there, then I will do it. And again, it's not set in stone. So if you the next day or 3 months later decide, oh, the record was not what I wanted, I'm now creating a lot of extra stuff and I want to have extra class or something, then just change it to class and you should be okay. So back to the UTF-8. So the UTF-8 is another small feature that you can use. If you put the U8 suffix for the string, suddenly you are creating, if you look at this one, read-only span of bytes. And what it allows you to create is basically UTF-8 string literal. So it's like a literal, it's a string literal, but I'm getting not a string because that's UTF-16 in C#. I'm getting UTF-8, and I'm getting it as a basically array of bytes, or in this case, read-only span of bytes. So for like parsing, pattern matching, or even serializing something inside, that's a nice way to do it, because before you had two options: create a string and convert it to UTF-8, which takes precious CPU cycles, or create it basically as an array. So then I would have to do like new byte and do something like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 4, which is exactly the same or more or less the same. The problem is that if I give you this one, you have no idea what's part of the string. While if I give you this one, well, you can say, oh, it's a test, or it's like some header in HTTP, or I don't know, like a host from HTTP, if we are talking about this one, or something like that. You can immediately see it. You can immediately change it if you need to, like, hey, the colon should not be there. We are parsing it differently. I can just remove it. If it's in the array of bytes, you can probably guess it's the last byte in there. But what if it's not? Whatever, there's a space or something like that. This is way, way easier. So that allows me to create UTF-8 string literals. Another small feature, you probably have quite often, or at least I do, a class, let's call it Ext, which is a class that's like extensions for only something. Let's say public static string person, string foobar this person, and let's return an empty string, and let's create it a little bit shorter. So this is an extension method, and it's an extension class because you need to put it in there, especially for interfaces or other stuff. This is something that's quite often needed. The problem is that now you are creating a class that's visible in the code. So if I go in here and I do X, I can see it. There's a new modifier now that you can use, and it's called file. What this allows you to do is say, hey, this class or whatever you are using is only valid in this file. So I can still use it in here. So I have the X, obviously, and if I would have a new person, something like this, and do this, I have the foobar. But if I put it into like different file or something, I will not see it. So like helper methods, helper classes, and something like that, you can scope it only into the file itself. And it's not going to pollute the IntelliSense or something like that across the code. So we've seen a bunch of those features. I'm now moving into the C# 12, which I've mentioned is or will be in like 24 hours the latest version of the C#. And there's a few small pieces that I would like to talk about with the C# 12. So everybody likes this syntax for records. You can basically create a record and immediately define a constructor, including the properties and so on and so on. I can still create my own extra constructor of something else. That's still fine. It tells me how I need to call this. So I will need to call this and do something about it. So name and age, well, the age. So let's do something this and we'll be fine. I can define everything I want, but this short syntax is really, really nice. Again, especially if you are using it as like a data objects from a database, which was the question, or something like that, and you need extra arguments, parameters. You are deserializing JSON or something like that. So it's really, really handy. The problem is that once I say, okay, well, the record is not for me, I need a normal class, so let's do class, then I'm out of luck. I need to do the brackets and constructor, and suddenly it's a little bit longer, and there's all this noise and so on and so on. But what I can do, obviously, is now use this primary constructors feature. In this case, it should be probably lowercase. I will show you why in a second. But I have basically the same feature. The only difference is that for records, this defines not only the constructor arguments, but also the properties. With the primary constructors for classes and structures and whatnot, if it's not a record, it defines a variable. So I would like to probably create a property for this one. So let me create this one, and let's call it full name, and let's do name, for example. And as you can see, now the compile is happy. It's not giving me the green squigglies telling me like, hey, you are using age, but you are never using it or something like that. Now I have to explicitly define this one. So that's the primary constructor that we can use in here. The stuff that I'm using here does not have to be this. Probably even shouldn't. I should probably use something like this. Initialize it, but it's up to me what I'm looking for and what I'm doing. I can obviously create a method like let's override to string, and let's return full name dot. Sorry, I call it name dot to string, for example, or whatever. I can absolutely call it. That's absolutely fine. I can have some logic. I don't know if I have like a full name. Let me do this. And let's call it full name. Let's put it in here. Let's do string, and let's do name, or even like a string interpolation. I can do name and brackets or something, and age, for example. and it's absolutely fine. So I can do whatever I want. This is basically a variable that I have access to, and that I can use for something. By default, this has the scope of the initialization phase, basically. But you can make the scope a little bit bigger and spread it into methods, other pieces of code, and so on and so on. It's just going to create a slightly bigger code for you and hidden variable or whatnot for this one. So that's something to be aware of. I think the final version of Visual Studio that will be released tomorrow, or maybe if you start the installer, it will offer you the final version because it's like spreading across the internet now. It will give you warning telling you like, hey, maybe you are extending, for example, the age scope to something that you don't want to, or something like that. So can I do a name? Probably I can't. Or I can, yeah. Oh, name of is not what I'm looking for. Type of, no, that's not it. Yeah, anyway, it will give you warning about that. So that should be okay. So the next one, which is really interesting piece of code, is collection expressions. In fact, it's one of the nicest pieces of code that I've used so far for this one. So let me copy paste a piece of code so I don't have to type it, and let's have a look at it. So now if you are creating like an integer array, for example, let's go foo, normally what you would probably do is something like this, right? You can even skip the new if you want, but probably you are typing it in there, especially if you've been with C# for a long time, because this was required with previous versions of the C#. The problem is that if I decide, well, it's not an integer array, it's not something that I would like to have, and you want to change it to something else, like a span or list or dictionary or something, you need to change it slightly, how you initialize it, depending on the collection. Now what you can do in a C# is to basically have these square brackets and use this as the initialization for the collection. And it can be array of integers, it can be span of integers, it can be list of integers. It does not care as long as it's a collection, as long as it's a little bit of the collection. I will show you what you need to do for your own collection if you want to support it. But basically all the default collections that are available in base class library, including like lists and dictionaries and whatnot, they support this one. So that simplifies greatly creating some collection, and you will just say, hey, this is the type, and I'm going to use it, and that's it. If you're creating your own type, it's again supported and you can use it. But what you can also do is a slightly different piece of code. So you probably understand this one. Square brackets, something into it, and it's fine. But there's a new operator called spread operator, and that allows you to basically create a collection from other collections. So now I have 3 arrays in here, and I would like to create a big one. So what I'm doing is using these 2 dots, saying basically, hey, take everything from the row 0 and put it as the first 3 elements in here. And then take row 1 and put another 3 elements in here, and then the next stuff. So now if I run it, or it's already in the command, if I run it, it tells me like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because I've put all of these together. Pretty simple stuff. Together with pattern matchings on the lists, again, consistency in the code, together with ranges and indices, again, pretty handy feature that you can combine together and use for something. So if I do like, give me like something like that, then it will give me 1, 2, 3. Basically, I'm saying, hey, give me everything from the beginning all the way to the index number 3. Pretty useful feature, and everything kind of fits together because I have the square brackets, I have the 2 dots, and so on and so on. So again, like pattern matching, creating, and so on and so on. Everything is nicely together. So the pattern matching, that's part of the C#, I don't know, since like 7, 8 or something, fits nicely with also these lists and everything around. So if I go and do a little bit of fun, for example, if I would do if single is, I can start with a simple one, like if it's just like an empty stuff, I can do that. I can see if it's whatever. If I can say what I can say, var x, it tells me like, hey, the x will be the integer array and it will contain everything. And I can say if it's like var first and then it's the rest, then I can do the pattern matching with this one, depending on whatever. And if I say, hey, if the first one is 1, then match it. And if the second is 3, then match it, and so on and so on. And so I can put variables, constants, and so on inside this one. And this makes it, this makes everything kind of like nicely aligned and everything together, because I'm using the square brackets. I don't have to worry about like arrays and lists and dictionaries. Everything is the same, and I don't have to do much about the other stuff. So let me copy paste again a piece of code to show you how you can put it into your own class. And it does not have to be let me remove this one. Oh no, I needed where it doesn't have to be like real list or something. It can be something a little bit simpler, and so on and so on. So why is it complaining? Oh, using system collections, not code DOM, collections. Now it's fine. Awesome. So now I have this line buffer that I copy pasted from the documentation, and I would like to be able to create it. So let me clean this up. So let's say line buffer line equals, and I would like to say 1, 2, 3, for example, or whatever. In my case, it's character, so it's slightly different, but we can fix that later. And it does not work because the compiler is telling me like, hey, I don't see the add method, that was the original one, and I don't even know how to create it from like this one, for example, read only span. So if you would like to support it, what you can do is create another class. You can call it basically whatever you want. It's called line buffer builder, and have a create method with some input argument like, hey, I can create it from this one. So for example, read only span, I have integers, so we can expand it to the integers as well. And the final piece of puzzle, as you can probably guess, is putting an attribute on the line buffer. And it says, hey, if you want to have like the collection build, just use the collection builder and call the create method. So if I would do integers in here, obviously this one is now complaining, but it's fine. Then come on, focus. Oh, I can because I have the characters. Okay, let's do it the other way around. It will be easier. I will put this as the characters. It will be faster than rewriting it from left to right. Oh, Visual Studio, stop helping me. And now it's fine. It creates the line buffer for me and calls the create method. And I can have a bunch of these create overloads in case I have other pieces. So if it's not a read-only span, but it's, for example, I don't know, character array, it's there's an implicit conversion, so that will be fine. But whatever, like list of characters or whatnot, I can just do it. Obviously now it's complaining because it has no idea what to do with the list, but yeah, I can do something about it and it will be fine. Let's do the simplest stuff to array, and now it will be fine. So that allows me to have like a nice succinct code and do something like in the background, and the developer does not need to know like how I am going to create this class. There's a question, how to remember all the new feature syntax. I'm still writing code using C#8 and Visual Studio asks or resharper to translate into new modern syntax. I think this is a good way to do it. As you can see, the Visual Studio is offering me a bunch of these like light bulbs or screwdrivers, telling me like, hey, you can use something else, or there is a shorter way of doing it, and you can obviously turn off and turn on some features. So for example, if you don't like this short new stuff, you can use editor config and turn it off. But there's one feature that I'm from time to time using. If you go into the error list, very likely, especially if you are like me, you turn off these messages, because these messages, I don't want to say they are noisy, but sometimes there's like too much, especially if you take the old code and open it in like new Visual Studio. There's a bunch of those, and you say, hey, I don't have time for this one. I would like to fix the code into the new syntax, but I don't have time for it, or I want to like turn it off, but I don't have time to fix the editor config file. So I just turn it off, so it's a little bit easier to focus on warnings and errors. But from time to time, go into your code and just show the messages, and you will see a bunch of those like hints that are telling you like, hey, you can use this. It's a shorter syntax, or it's an easier syntax. And it's sometimes also giving you like performance hints. So for example, if I would like to have current ID of my process, so the good old trusty way of doing it is do process get current process and then the ID, for example. And if I do var process ID, then I can do this one, right? The problem with this is that I call the get current process. What it will give me is the full process object with all the properties that are in there, including the start time and exit time, and what else, working sets for the memory and list of threads and modules. And basically it needs to create this really heavy object. And if you are doing this for logging purposes or just like putting it somewhere and taking just the ID, it created this huge object for nothing. And if I go in here and click on the light bulb or screwdriver, it says use environment process ID. And if I click on it, the process ID is just an integer. And just for the sake of fun, let me bring in the documentation window. We will see that the environment process ID was introduced in .NET 5. So it's been around for a little bit. But especially if you recently migrated from .NET Framework, or you are not looking into all the different changes, which you are probably not, because there's probably like thousands of different methods and properties in new versions, you might not know that there's a process ID on the environment, and you might be using this like good old code, just wasting the resources. So from time to time, go there, turn on the messages, and check what's in there. If on a normal code base, it would be not 4, there would be probably like 4,000. But you can, first of all, knock out some of them across the board. So I can do this and say new and say, hey, in the whole solution, like fix it in whole solution, and that's it. And it's like 500 gone. It's the new syntax and whatnot. Or if you're not interested, you can I do it from this one? There it is, suppress, and I can say that I'm not interested in this one. It creates either suppression file or editor config, or even on this single line, you can choose which one you want to like disable, enable, or something like that. And you can, let's say, clean it up a little bit from, and get like feel for what's new in there. And obviously, if you are using ReSharper or Rider or something like that, VS Code, you have the same features there as well. Spread copied from JavaScript. It's nice they decided to bring it in. I absolutely agree. It's a nice feature. It's a shorthand, and it creates a really, really nice piece of code. So what else we have for C# 12? Well, another one is the alias for whatever you want to use. You probably know that you can use using and process, let's call it proc, and let's say it's system diagnostics process, and not processor, proc, for example. And now if I am doing, let me do this old stuff. So it's the proc dot get processes, whatever. I can use this like shortcut, especially if it's like a long namespace or collisions or something. It's nice one to use this one. But what was the problem is that you cannot, for example, use this one for a tuple. So if I would have X and Y, and let's call it point, in previous versions of the C#, you cannot use this one. And now you can, obviously, as you can see, it's not complaining. So I can now say, hey, I have a point P and whatever, new point or something like that. And it's using this tuple that I have in here. So if I have, tuples or some other types like arrays or something, then I can use this one. So for example, I can do data equals, and it's an integer array, for example. And now if I need to create something that would be data, I can say, hey, data, and it's basically an alias for an array. So even if you have like two different data types or something, and it's both like integer array, you can give it a name and it will be like nicely recognizable what it is. Especially for tuples or arrays or other stuff, that's a little bit nicer to deal with this one, except like, I don't know, just saying, hey, if it's an integer array, it's this and that, and so on and so on. So there's also an experimental feature for interceptors, which is really not that useful for day-to-day development. It's more for like source generators, but I'm mentioning it because you will hear about it a lot. But I would like to mention as well one small feature, especially as because I'm working in the performance area, and it's inline arrays. So what this allows me to do is create an object, whatever name I want, and specify one and exactly one element of some type. In my case, it's integer. And then I specify the inline array attribute, and I say how big it is, and I say it's 10. So what it's basically doing is creating me 10 of these elements in line in my structure. And not only it's shorter, but it's also a little bit easier to deal with it in case I need to make it bigger or something. And this allows me to create a simple, like a structure type stuff that allows me to put like 10 elements into my buffer. And it's called inline array because it's not really like array that like has a start and then you can put whatever number of elements you decide. In my buffer, I can put only 10 elements. And these 10 elements are spread in the memory like one after each other, exactly as I wrote it. Like if I would create like 10 properties or 10 fields, it's exactly the same stuff. So it does not have a length. It does not have all the array-ish stuff that we are used to have. It's basically just one huge type that has a bunch of these properties. And you could do that before, no question about it. You could do it manually. But now if I want to change it from this to like 15, I just change it to 15 and that's it. I don't have to go there and do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and add extra 5 elements or something like that. And from the language standpoint of view, I'm still using it as an array. If I created my own class or my own structure, I could spend another hour or two kind of like tweaking it so it behaves like an array. I can have like the indexing and I can have whatnot, like a constructor and whatever. But it was tiring, especially if you would like to have like 5 of these types, because you need to have always the same constructor, always the same indexer, and you need to do like if the x or if the I is 0, then the element 0. If it's 5, then element 5, and so on and so on. So very likely, if you would be using this quite often for performance reasons, you would create a simple PowerShell Python script that would generate the code for you, or even C# code that would generate the code for you. Now it's the compiler doing the work for you. You just specify the inline array attribute. So with that, let me check our time. Yeah, we have like 10 minutes for questions. So if you have more questions, or if you've heard about a feature and you would like to know more about it, just type it in the chat or something like that, and I will jump into it.
Guys, yes, you're very welcome to ask your questions. I saw some comments in the chat. Have you covered all of them?
Yes, I believe I did. If not, just ask again. But I believe I covered all of them, all like 5 or
Okay,
6.
maybe someone wants to be unmuted, then push raise hand button, and then I'll unmute you.
Okay, there's a question. Which is your favorite feature if you had to pick? For me, probably the string, the raw string literals. For a simple reason, it's so easy and so like life improving that it would be my best feature. Yes, there is like, I don't know, the list patterns and inline array, and it's like it's a valuable feature. None of those features is like whatever. But from like day to day copy pasting code, doing tests and putting strings out, the raw string literals with like 3 or more double quotes, that would be my favorite feature, especially as I spent last 20 years fixing strings left and right and composing them and so on and so on. So yeah, definitely that one. And another one before was default lambda parameters is also a good feature from C# 12. Yes, absolutely. If you have a lambda, you can put a default value for the argument as well. Basically putting, I think all of the features from last 3 versions of C# that are related to lambdas are focused on making the lambdas exactly the same as methods. All the features, attributes, default parameters, and whatnot with the normal methods. So if you have like a normal method and for whatever reason you need to have it as a lambda because it's inline or whatnot, you just copy paste and it should work because there, especially in C# 12, there is not much, from top of my head, none, but maybe there is something that's supported on methods and it's not supported on lambdas. Now it should be like 99% absolutely supported. What might be the use case for using inline arrays? It's pretty simple. It's performance code. Like you have fixed you have like a fixed buffers, fixed structures, which is quite often used for performance sensitive code, because you know you don't need to resize it, you know the size exactly, and then you can really quickly and really easily index into that array itself. So if you have normal array and you're indexing into like fifth element, the runtime needs to take, hey, this is the start of an array, skip a little bit at the beginning where's the length and other stuff, and then go to whatever element you are asking, plus check the ranges and everything. If you are using this inline array, it's like fixed 10 elements. So if you say, hey, go to the element 5, there is already code for that one, like go to the element 5. I don't have to check all the stuff around, where's the beginning and so on, because it's really like this is the beginning of the structure and there is 5 or 10 or something elements. So definitely high performance code where you don't want to do some extra allocations, especially if you're using structures, because then you can allocate it on the stack, for example. So you don't have to go into the heap itself. Does it look like many of these features help interact with native apps? I'm thinking inline arrays, for example. Yes. But from my point of view, these features, for example, like ref variables, ref returns, and other stuff, these are for like library writers. So yeah, for obviously native interop, that's really useful. But most of these features are being used inside like ASP.NET Core, inside Kestrel, inside the runtime to help it, and you can use them as well. Have you used interceptors? What are the use cases for it? I did, as I was playing with the feature. The use case is basically to be able to replace a piece of code in already existing code as part of the source generator. The only current real world usage is if you are using minimal APIs in ASP.NET Core and you are using native AOT. And for native AOT, you need to have all the code will be statically compiled, all the code. But for the minimal APIs, sometimes you have lambdas and these request delegates. So now there is a source generator that's basically turning whatever was done in the runtime into the static code, but then it needs to replace your map get or map post or whatever you are using in minimal APIs with the new code. Originally, it was done as part of the overload resolution, that the source generator was generating more specific code, and the C# is always taking the most specific overload that it can find. But it was found that this is kind of fragile, because in like, I don't know, 99% of the cases, you can generate more specific code. But it was decided that in the future, it might not always be the case. And then relying on the overall resolution will be fragile. So they decided to implement it on top of this interceptors features, where basically whatever is the call side, you will replace it with your own extra code. And you are absolutely sure that you are calling exactly what you are supposed to be calling, and not relying on some feature that might break in the future, or even inadvertently when somebody creates a method that will have more specific set of parameters or something like that. So that's the, I don't want to say the only one, but that's the current use case for this one as part of the ASP.NET Core for minimal APIs. The interceptors is still in preview, so you can turn it on, but you can use it for your own stuff. To turn it on, you just select these features element and say interceptors preview, and you just use it. To give you an idea what it looks like, let me copy paste a piece of code. Where can I paste it? Maybe in here. It's going to obviously complain a lot, but that's fine. So how it works is, and let's ignore the squigglies because it's not properly placed and so on, is that you have like a method like this one, and you would like to like replace it with something else. So you can generate a class or whatever. You can just generate a code using the source generator feature in C# that's been there for, I don't want to say forever, but quite a long time. I think C#9 introduced that one. And you generate a piece of code, and then you put this intercepts location element or attribute on top of the method, and you specify the file name, and I believe the final specification, because I'm taking it from the language design. I think I'm like 99% sure. I'm just confused from the proposal, but maybe from the proposal, the first like limitation is that you need to provide a full path. It cannot be a relative path. So that's really targeted to code generating the code. You would not be writing it manually, because if you write it manually, then if something changes, somebody has the code in a different place, then obviously this path would not be correct. And then you just specify the line and the character where you need to do the replacement. So you would say like line 14 character. What is this character? For example, it's the, where is my character? Character 27. I'm taking it from here, character 27, just in case you are wondering when I'm getting it. And then I would put it in here. So yeah, you can type it manually. You can use it for whatever you want. Like you can change the method that's being intercepted, and you can change it and change the behavior or whatnot. But it's really not targeted for manual writing. It's targeted for like machine generated code, because all of these paths and lines and characters are not something that you would like to keep manually. Because now if I don't know, like create an if statement in here, right? If through, for example, and do this, suddenly my line is 16 and my character for this one is 31. So I would need to go and fix it manually, which is like doable, but really, really error prone. So it's mostly targeted to people creating source generators and having to replace a piece of code that's already there. Yes, there's a comment. The main problem I get is the exact path of the code. Exactly, that's the reason why it probably needs to be generated by some kind of generator. It probably does not have to be source generator. It can be like a script or something, but still it needs to be full path. So if I check out the code on my machine and I have like a D drive and it's D source, whatever, and then my friend checks it out and it's like C documents, whatever, it needs to be regenerated for him to be able to compile. So it needs to be halfway automated or something like that.